Good morning, everybody. I'm Rabbi Joy Levitt, the Director of Adult Engagement at Central Synagogue, and it's a pleasure to see all of you this morning, some of you earlier than you're normally on Zoom. We appreciate it. This program had its genesis in the early weeks after the massacre by Hamas. Naamah Kelman, one of our panelists this morning, the interviewer, and I talk every day as close friends. And I think, honestly, we talk more for me than for her. My need, I'm sure I'm not alone in this room, for connection, for information, just to show up, is so acute. And I think this is not unusual in my relationship with Nami. She was actually buoying me up when in fact it was my job to give her hope. And part of that came from a sense that we did not have here in this country immediately about the way in which civil society in Israel was pivoting so quickly to provide mutual support for those who had been so deeply affected. And we got the idea that these stories needed to be heard by Americans, that there's more to the story of this tragedy than the despair that we read every day in the newspaper and hear on TV. That is there. But also there is the incredible resilience of the Israeli people, particularly in light of what had been going on before the massacre with the protest movement. So you see this country going from fracture to unity literally overnight, and we wanted to find a way to tell that story. So I'm delighted to welcome my dear, I won't say old friends, but my dear good friends, Elan Ezrachi and Rabbi Naamah Kelman. Ezrachi, they are known to many of you. Nami recently stepped down as the dean of Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, was the first woman rabbi in Israel, and an activist, feminist, and one of the most extraordinary friends that anyone can have. Elan Ezrachi has lived in Jerusalem his whole life. Fourth generation, fifth generation, I can never remember. Third generation. Okay. Third generation Yerushalmi, is an activist, has fought hard for strengthening the diversity and character of the city of Jerusalem. He's a writer, he's a teacher, he holds a PhD. He has most recently taught at the University of Haifa. And so with that, I will welcome Nami and Elan to set the stage for this series that we will be having. Thanks you so much for doing this, guys.
Toda rabba, Rabbi Joy. I'll just say that Elan may be 3, but we already have 4 and 5. So first of all, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. And I see some very close friends and family members, and I'm just really, really touched that you've made the time this morning to join us. I want you to know that although we will be focusing on Israel and the home front, the oref, which is the Hebrew word for home front, which is also this part of our neck in biblical Hebrew, and we are a stiff-necked people, and you will be hearing from some very courageous stiff-necked people in the coming weeks who have been I call it no less than a Jewish Israeli miracle, because it also includes all of Israel's citizens, Arab citizens, Druze, etc. You will be meeting them and hearing from them. I want you to know that we feel very much your vulnerability and your worry of growing anti-Semitism, and we hear it loud and clear. And so again, more grateful that you've made the time for this. So as we enter what seems like a 4th week, and the before feels like 100 years ago, things remain very, very dynamic. Every day is different, and urgent issues change. And what was so urgent in the first week has, I wouldn't say nothing has taken a back seat, but other issues have become more urgent. And I think I speak for many of us when I say we seesaw between despair and hope and grief and mourning and resilience and fear and resolve. And it's kind of a cycle of this, all day long, depending on the headlines you've read or the noises you've heard over your head nearby. So we went from, I think, the shock of the invasion, the horror and the surprise, the number of dead and those taken hostage, of course, and the weeks it's taken, and it's still going on, to identify the losses and the dead. And all this while missiles are fired over our country from the north, from the south. They are not stopping. And with the
discriminate against the Yemenites.
wait, I'm getting to that. Yes. And I'll get there. And with that, of course, with the invasion and the massacre, and then the missiles coming in at the same time, there's been a huge evacuee, refugee, internal crisis that we're facing. And now you can add the ground operation. So we are dealing with all of these things simultaneously and chronologically. So if you feel confused and overwhelmed, yes, we are. And so again, if we go back, and if that's kind of the macro, so micro, and what gives us hope is what I will call the first responders. And the first responders were an organization, although Laura will tell you about her own personal brothers in arms, who within hours even of the attack were down south, involved in rescue, transport, food supplies, getting people in, getting people out, soldiers in, getting people out, saving people. And again, within hours, the NGOs and particularly the protest movement morphed into the biggest civil society of welfare, relief, food, supplies, etc. And building centers in each city, in each location, to make sure that our soldiers would be fed and clothed and equipped. And then that turned into evacuees being fed and clothed and equipped. We'll go into some of that. So that's been, as I say, no less than a miracle. And we're going to tell the unique Jerusalem story, because in Jerusalem, of course, whatever we do is unique, like New York, and it has an interesting, wonderful story. In addition, in the first responders, I will mention President Joe Biden, who came within days, and that was a huge injection of hope, and the sense that the American government is seriously involved in all that goes on. And meanwhile, I don't know whether to call this phases or spirals or interconnected spirals, but so as I say, phase one was helping and dealing with soldiers. Phase two is the emergence also, and it gets more and more dramatic by the day, the hostage crisis, which by the second week, there was a kind of makeshift encampment in Tel Aviv, where weeks later, there's already a daily kind of prayer service, one of which I co-officiated at this week, where you see Israelis of all backgrounds want to get together and sing and pray for themselves and for hostages. I mentioned the growing evacuee crisis, where people are in hotels, kibbutzim in the center. Again, we'll talk about that. Also, simultaneously, we are burying our dead, and there are many. Word for war room in Hebrew is chamal. Cheder milchama, it's an acronym, but it's the same root as chemla, which means compassion. So we are both a war room and a compassion center. We have not forgotten our humanity and our compassion. We're trying desperately to keep both. And I've been involved with a group of many people, rabbis and spiritual support leaders, going to homes of Shiva, helping people. There's also the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And of course, the fears of what's going to happen internally, Israeli Arabs, West Bank, and Syria, and Yemen. I did add Yemen. And how do we cope day to day with all this uncertainty and mourning, and how do we also get back to normal? Schools have opened in Jerusalem, but not elsewhere. What are the new rituals, and what are we doing as the Shloshim on next Tuesday is kind of the Shloshim, the 30th day of the outbreak of this war, every personal 30th day of mourning. So these are all things that are happening. And last but not least, of course, how do we keep connected to world Jewry? And this is just one little example of how we do that. So I'll let Elan now give you a different framework, and then we'll move to Laura.
So before we move to Laura, I'd like to share with you a tool that I developed that I think might be helpful to understand the answer to a very simple question that I'm sure that many of you have been asking your Israeli friends, relatives, colleagues, and whatsoever. A simple question: how are you? So how do Israelis answer this question? By the way, there is now an evolving conversation about what language do you use when you are personally feeling good, like I'm feeling okay now, but I'm in a completely different mindset that I cannot say I'm feeling good, and what kind of language do you use? And I'm going to put that aside and try to be a little more sociological, and take me, I promise you, not more than 2 minutes. And in order to do that, I want to share a graph, a visual that I prepared that I thought you might appreciate. And I see the question to the answer of how are you in 5 concentric circles that every person in this conversation, including all the people in New York or in the United States right now, can find themselves in this chart. Of course, the inner circle is the one that we are aware of the most and empathize with the most and feel their pain to the extent that we're close to it. Those are the people who are directly affected. Directly affected, you can understand that it's a whole range of things: people who are killed, wounded, abducted, their relatives, lost their homes, and stayed alive, and so forth. That is a sizable group. I'm not going to quantify it because it has its own internal breakdowns, but it is a sizable group in terms of the impact on society. And you might remember that at the beginning of this event, there were attempts to make comparisons to the critical mass of people directly affected compared to 9/11. And I think the proportions were that it was much more than 9/11 if you compare it, in proportions. That's the first group. The second group, which was mentioned by Naamah, is the group of evacuees. Even the term evacuee is something which is a work in progress. Are they refugees? Are they displaced people? That's another connotation to another era. Are they people who are temporarily out of their homes, but they'll be back within a few days? But we're talking about 125,000 people, formally speaking, in terms of the government figures, but the estimates is that there are close to 300,000 people who are currently not in their homes. They might be in hotels, they might be in boarding schools that were prepared for them, they might be in relatives' homes, they might be actually renting an apartment in Athens or in Cyprus, or they might be in New York. But a sizable number of Israelis are just displaced, and there's a whole range of things that needs to be taken care of as a result of this thing. I'm sure Laura will address that. Then we have the third, and here the graphic perhaps ruins it a bit. And these are people who are enlisted to the service, regular soldiers and reservists, and their families who are now sitting at home, very nervous about what's going on over there. And if they are in the combat areas, they are actually at risk in a very immediate way. The fourth tier, which you could say they're out of the range of the issues, but they're really not, is what I call here Israeli society at large. Of course, Jewish and Arab. These are people all over Israel, ourselves included, who are at some level are vulnerable and affected by the situation. And I'm not talking about the way we feel. I'm talking about directly affected. That could be running every other day to a protected area because of sirens. That could be loss of a job. That could be a loss of a business. That could be inability to complete a project because the workers are not coming in. That is the complete cessation of all cultural and communal activities. Israeli society is affected throughout its entire boundaries, of course, in different levels. And that is something that we need to consider when we talk about civil society, because the same people who are affected are also the people who are rising to the task of taking care of those who are affected. And finally, slightly in a different color, but no less important, is World Jewry. That I would say that if I would put up this kind of a tool, a few months ago, a few years ago, I wouldn't put World Jewry necessarily in the same continuum. But let me tell you, it is really in the same continuum. And I'm not talking only because you're telling us that. I think Israelis are saying this. Israelis, perhaps for the first time, are realizing that we're in this together. This is a new kind of a sentiment that is going on among Israelis. I will stop here because maybe we'll discuss that in the Q&A, and I really want to clear the space for Laura, but take into the account that Israelis are much more attuned to the plight of World Jewry than ever before, perhaps because reality calls for that. So thank you for looking at this chart. We'll go back to the to Laura, and now
Yeah, I'd like to introduce
our distinguished guest.
So I'll just say that 2 days ago, Israel was supposed to hold local and municipal elections across the entire country. And in some ways, 100 years ago, when we were still in the protest movement, for many of us, particularly in the protest movement, it was going to be a kind of midterm test of the current government. Of course, everything has changed and the municipal elections have been postponed to late January. But Dr. Laura Warton remains a member of Jerusalem City Council, representative of the Meretz Party. She's my representative. I'm her constituent. She also is an adjunct lecturer in political science at Hebrew University, born in the US and emigrated to Israel after receiving her BA from Harvard University in government. She actually put that BA to work and later on completed her graduate studies and PhD at Hebrew University. Her research produced a book called Is the Party Over? How Israel Lost Its Social Agenda, for which she was awarded the Prime Minister's Prize in memory of Levi Eshkol. She has a lot to tell you from those first hours of October 7th. Laura.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the hosts and all the guests here, and to, of course, to Naamah and Elan, dear friends. What I thought I'd do is talk about 3 things. First, about how it began, what it was like to be at home in Jerusalem on the 7th of October. Then I'll talk about what the situation is now and what we're doing in Jerusalem. And then I'll try to say a few words about where I see things going and what our hopes and fears are a little bit from over here. So I'll start just by saying that, continuing what Naamah said, on the 7th of October, I was supposed to be at a bunch of election events because the city elections all over Israel were supposed to have taken place on Tuesday, the 31st of October. And instead of the day as I planned it, I woke up to and saw a WhatsApp from a friend who asked me if I was all right. And I didn't know what she was talking about. This is Saturday morning, nice day, sun shining. And then I immediately got an SMS from the Magen David Adom, the asking for blood donations, which they send out in, case of emergency and stuff. And then I slowly started getting reports, first from WhatsApps and friends on kibbutzim, about this terrible slaughter that was taking place, was still taking place as we spoke, and began to understand what was happening. Elan said something about the proportions. If I do a rough calculation as a former math teacher, I'd say it would be as if 40,000 people were killed in the US, as we're talking about, something like 1,500 people slaughtered in a country of 10 million people. That is, it is a disaster that unlike anything Israel has ever known. Of course, of almost all civilians, including children, infants, elderly, whatever. I'm sure you've all heard plenty about it. But what I want to say was that initially, really, we didn't know what was happening. But before I knew it, everyone was involved. And after I got this SMS asking to give blood, I went to give blood, and there was already a huge line. Before I managed to give blood, there was a line of hundreds of people behind me. And eventually later that day, my first request to the mayor, I'm a member of city council today, was to open up more places to give blood. And the problem was there weren't enough people to take blood. But there were already hundreds of people lined up. And eventually in Jerusalem, we opened up a sports arena and had thousands of people giving blood there to provide. And it was beyond what anyone knew what to do with. And they had a problem of how to, keep the blood refrigerated, because that was the first thing that we were asked to do, and everyone did it. And then I went to the center. A bunch of friends and I started putting out Google forms. If you want to volunteer, come to this place that someone arranged. And I went to this place, and before I knew it, there were hundreds of people at this volunteer center that is running to this day. I'll just say now we have more than 5,000 registered volunteers who are working there at any given time. There are a few hundred people there volunteering. And what was amazing to me is how quickly everyone came together to do whatever they could. And on the other hand, how shocking it was that the government wasn't there. To this day, there are a lot of government ministries that are not functioning. On the way home now, I heard on the radio how Keren Kayemet, the Jewish National Fund, is still funding people staying in hotels because the government hasn't put out any money to cover the costs of people who have been evacuated and are living in hotels. In Jerusalem, we're talking about between 15 and 20,000 people. And no one is yet really taking responsibility. Today, the CEO of the Minister of Education had a meeting in the municipality, but the government has been incredibly slow, whereas civil society, as I said, was drafted immediately to came in to do things. In talking about how things look now, as I said, we have thousands of volunteers and a lot of more people who have come and weren't sure what they could do, so went home but are on call. These people are as old as I am or older, and a lot of young people, a lot of students. One of the many side effects of the war is that the university is not opened. It was supposed to have opened several weeks ago, and they didn't open it up because, for example, in my department, about 40% of the students have been called up for reserve duty. So the whole universities are frozen, and both faculty and all the administrative staff and all the students are now involved in helping. One of the things we're thinking about now at our center is how we're going to deal with what will happen once the students go back, because they have been wonderful in joining in and helping all the time. Another thing that we saw very quickly is that people would come and came up with ideas to deal with all kinds of tasks that the government wouldn't have thought of and still hasn't thought of. One very lovely example, I think, is I saw my neighbor's daughter out walking a dog. And I said, what a lovely dog, is that new? And she said, no, it's the dog that belongs to a reservist, and he was looking for someone who could look for his dog while he was away. And there's now a whole group of people, animal lovers, who are taking care of reservist dogs and pets while they're away. Our center has also been doing things like giving psychological support. We have all kinds of social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists who have volunteered and are working on our staff. We're doing activities for the young. One of the people I work with now is doing worked with youth movements and is year of volunteering in Lod, and he's now organizing activities for young people, high school age people and youth, to keep them busy and give them activities to do. One of the things I've been involved in is clearing out shelters, bomb shelters, and we've gotten groups of young people in youth movements to come and help clean out bomb shelters. I'll say a little bit more about that, but it's something that the city and the national services had not taken care of. So we're doing it now, and we have volunteers from all over. Today we had a meeting in the municipality to divide up the work between public and private shelters in apartment buildings versus public shelters. And as I said, it's just been wonderful because we've had people volunteering and coming in, cleaning out bomb shelters for people who couldn't themselves, people who are disabled, elderly people, Holocaust survivors, all kinds of issues. We also have a staff that's been helping people, families who have family members who have fallen, either who were killed in the initial slaughter or soldiers who fell, and that there's also a huge outpouring of public support. I was at in Jerusalem, since a big city, we have 10% of the country's population. We also have had a huge, shocking number of funerals, and we have had so yesterday there was a funeral, someone from my neighborhood, someone my son's age. It was very hard to see and go to, and in the neighborhood, in the city, and all the WhatsApp groups, they put out a call to have people come and help support, and there are thousands of people at this funeral, as has happened at every funeral I've been to, and unfortunately I've been to a lot. There's also a team that helps families of fallen soldiers, who brings the family food, both during the Shiva and afterwards. The army is actually good about soldiers who have fallen, but there are a lot of people who lost children, family members in the original in the initial slaughter on the 7th of October, and it's not yet clear who will be responsible for them. I have a friend who's a journalist who picked up very quickly on a problem that it took, I think, almost 2 weeks for the National Insurance Organization to pick up on, and that was that there's no rubric in the National Insurance funding that helps people whose families are hostages. So it took a few weeks to get them any help. And there have been all kinds of things. So our group has been helping these people from day one, and the government has been very slow to step in. We also have been helping send volunteers to help farmers all over the country. In Jerusalem, as I said, we have a lot of young people. We have in Jerusalem almost 50,000 students at the university and other colleges. And they want to help, and there's a terrible problem for the agriculturists, both in the north and the south, because they've had to be evacuated. And this is the fall. This is when there's a lot of harvesting of apples, of pomegranates, of all kinds of things. So we've been sending volunteers to the south and north to help the few people who are left to save their crops.
And Laura, I'll just let you catch your breath. I'll just say that there were many Thai workers who
were killed.
Were working and harvesting and living in the Gaza envelope, and first of all, a number were killed, and others have been taken hostage, and they were for the first days also without anybody taking care of them except for civil society. You'll hear from in our third session, you'll hear from our daughter, who actually their little town, the next door, adopted 70 Thai workers for an entire week until they could be airlifted. So basically, also another victim of this massacre were all the foreign workers who were here working our lands, along with locals, and now there's a huge shortage. So people of all ages are going down and picking pomegranates and cauliflower, and people our age and younger. And this is just for now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's there have been a number of groups who've done that. There's also the group that I think you'll be hearing from, Achim Laneshik, Brothers in Arms, have done a great job with that. It hasn't been our focus, but it's been something that we've been working on just because we have so many young people. And since the studies, since the universities and the higher education is not yet open, they're looking for things to do. So we're helping to find ways that they can take part in this. Another thing that we've been doing in Jerusalem that's very complicated that the city was slow to pick up on was translating information. So we have a whole team in our civil center for volunteering where we translate into Amharic and English, of course, and Arabic and French and Spanish. And as much as we can, we try to reach out to the different populations, because Jerusalem, as you probably know, is a very multicultural city. And so we've taken upon ourselves doing a lot of that. Some of the translating we've done for and of even the materials that the city itself puts out. So that's just some of the range of the things that we do. That's what the volunteers are there for. But also want to talk about the clients that we have, because we've had a number of discussions of the management of this civil support center about how we should decide what we should be doing. We've decided to focus on Jerusalemites of all kinds and anyone in the city. But even that becomes complicated. For example, we provided hot meals at some of the hotels and some of the people, and provided hot meals also for people hosting refugees. I'll just mention that before the hotels started taking in people, we had a sign up out for families that were willing to take in other families, as we did, for example, and I did myself with the Ukrainian refugees when they started pouring in and no one knew what to do with them. So there are several hundred, maybe 1,000 families in Jerusalem who have taken into their homes families of refugees. But, they initially took them in for a few days, a week or so, and now it'll be almost a month. So we're trying to see to it that they get support in helping feed their guests and house their guests and getting some kind of compensation for that.
As the refugees, we mean Israelis. Dislocated.
Evacuees, I should say.
In other words, not Eritrean, Sudanese, or Afghani. They're actually our relatives and friends and colleagues.
I'll just add that kibbutzim along the border, they have been evacuated to hotels as whole units, like the Dead Sea hotels, Eilat hotels, some kibbutzim in the center, some hotels in Tel Aviv. And when you're an entire community, it's a little easier. And they're staying together as a community. Laura's talking about people from Ashkelon, from Kiryat Shmone, from Sderot. People are not necessarily in any kind of community. And at the moment, we're holding it together. But how long can we sustain this? There's talk about people remaining in these hotels until the end of December. Now, most of them do have homes to go back to. I'm not talking about the kibbutzim that were destroyed. So the question is when.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about how to deal with these people, especially with the young. So our mayor and the mayor in Jerusalem decided that he would try to adapt plans according to what the people wanted. So in some cases, the children are being fitted in, sent to schools in the city that already exists. So, for example, if they belong to Shas or something like that, they'll go to a Shas school in Jerusalem and they'll get bused there. And that's relatively easy because it's they feel at home there. There are other people who who are waiting and haven't yet decided. There are some places, especially I think with the kibbutzim and the communities that were evacuated as a whole, where they're trying to reconstruct the frameworks that they had. Let's say a kindergarten, they have most of the children in the kindergarten plus the kindergarten teacher with them. So they're trying to reconstruct that within the hotel. And then there are places where they're trying to build kind of a hybrid thing for whoever's in the hotel, and they might be from different places and not know one another. So we're still kind of reeling and figuring out what to do. I'll just say that one of the, I think most important things that both the city and together with the city, our center is trying to deal with is frameworks for the young people. Because if you can imagine, you know, a kid from Sderot or something in the South, you know, their houses were bombed, they were evacuated, they're brought to this hotel, they're living in 1 or 2 rooms with their family. They don't have proper school, they don't know what's going to be, they're scared, they're in a big, strange new city, and they're already like, you know, groups of young people wandering around, confused, scared, without anyone knowing how or where to look for them or look after them. And it's a big problem, or we could say challenge. I'll say something about our partners in this. I mentioned the city a few times. I think the city has been certainly much faster than the government, pulling in and taking over on things. And there are things that we're working on. For example, we suggested one of the things that the city is doing to help the families of reserve people who are serving in the reserves, to give them vouchers, both to give them extra income and support, and also the vouchers are good for Jerusalem businesses, because the Jerusalem businesses are in a terrible state. Of course, there's zero tourism, and what the businesses can live on is maybe some Jerusalemites who aren't afraid to go out, which is a minority, or some of the people who've been evacuated who are still trying to find their way around. We also work with the city, as I said, a little bit on the youth movement and so forth. We also are working together with and support, for example, in Tel Aviv, Achim L'Neshek, the brothers to Neshek, brothers in arms and so forth. We've also had a number of visits, I must say, from New York organizations, from New York rabbis, the New York Federation, and that's a wonderful, very heartening thing. Also, there was someone, those of you who may know the Ruderman Foundation, they had people coming to visit us today. And of all the people we work with, if it's the municipality, whatever, the missing party, of course, again, I must say, is the government, which hasn't come. We've had a number of members of Knesset from the opposition, but the government is busy doing other things.
Laura, I just want to say that your partners are the Jerusalem protest movement, known as guardians of our homeland, that again morphed overnight from a protest movement to a social action because of all the networks they had established during. And they joined with you and your party, which is a unified party, and another Jerusalem-based party, and another institution, which is also very Jerusalem, very pluralistic. I'll also say that I understand now at this command center, there's a Beit Midrash, for a pluralistic Beit Midrash. There's huge emphasis on Jewish pluralism, which is unique to Jerusalem. I'm mindful of the time, so Laura, maybe you can say something about East Jerusalem, and then we can open up, I hope, and Marina will help us here with a few questions. And I'll just remind everybody, we have 4 sessions, so we don't have to answer all your questions now. And we can't answer all your questions anyway. So maybe I think that's, again, unique to Jerusalem. We are seamless living with East and West Jerusalem. How do you see things? What's going on?
Okay, I'll just say one other thing about our partners. When I was talking about our partners, I was speaking as a member of the whole center, but I will mention that ironically, or maybe beautifully, one of the parts of this center we have with me as a representative of something called the Jerusalem Coalition, which is a group of Meretz and Avodah and Yesh Atid and another local party, is this guy who's represented from Hitorou, which is the rival party to us. And we worked together. And yesterday, some people took us pictures of us because we were cleaning together. We had a big cleaning session yesterday, so we were mopping floors together. And it was very nice that actually on the day that the elections were supposed to have taken place, we were working together. And we have, of course, in the center as not just our partners, but within this community center, we have religious people, religious people, including Orthodox, Reform, Conservative. I'm a member of the conservative movement, I must say, confess, and secular people all working together. And as for East Jerusalem, I say one of the biggest challenges that we have in Jerusalem is, of course, 40% of the population is Palestinian. They're not Israeli citizens, they're permanent residents in Jerusalem, but they don't have citizenship. And we've been trying to find ways to work with them. So we do work. Some of the food and donations we get, we distribute also to East Jerusalem, and they help volunteer with us. And we're trying to think of ways to work together. I'll also mention that my last meeting before I joined here, this discussion was with a group of Christians, Muslims, and Jews. We're working together. We're hoping to hold on the 7th of November an event together for mourning and hope for future life together, that, trying to say we don't just want to die together, we want to live together above all. And I'll just say another couple of things about the future. In Jerusalem, we've been very much, of course, trying to address the issue of the people who are captives now. And we had there's a big kind of exhibit display put in the center of Safra Square, where the municipality is, of beds. It wasn't 230 beds, but it was close, including baby cribs and whatever. And it was really very, very moving and powerful. We had representatives of the families, the hostages, come, and what the symbol that has been adopted here by many is wearing a yellow ribbon to try to show their sympathy and their demand to have the refugees come home. And we're hoping to develop,
hostages.
What did I say?
Refugees.
Refugees, sorry, hostages. And all I can say is that we're hoping that we can take this tragedy and move from it into a sense of solidarity, both within Jerusalem, of Palestinians who are also hurt and affected by, in all kinds of ways, including, a rise in racism against Arabs. And I can say more about that and what's being done. And religious, non-religious within Jerusalem, because we're all volunteering together and working together from different parties, as I said. And it could be an opportunity for solidarity. And within this group also, I would say, the backbone of all this organization is the protest movement. I mean, I think we are able to deal with this war, ironically, much better, and all the disasters of the government, because we have endless WhatsApp groups and the organization that was based on the protest group. And we're hoping that now we are not only talking about replacing the government, but we are, in fact, replacing the government and showing an alternative which is a community, society of solidarity rather than divisions. So maybe I'll stop there and ask for questions if there are.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that information with us. We have 2 questions right now, and please, people on Facebook, people on Zoom, please share your questions with us. And I wanted to combine these questions because they're quite similar. So thank you, Robert and Jen. We sense a disillusionment in the current government's slowness to act to help civilians throughout Israel. Why is the government ignoring the needs of civilians and acting so slowly? Or why are they so paralyzed? And how is it that the city is more engaged?
Okay, why the government isn't acting faster and better is a good question. And I think there are a number of the answers. One is, this government is an incompetent government. It's an incompetent government. It's not, I think just about all the things we're saying about it are true. I mean, the person who was put in charge of the Ministry of Education has no experience in education. The woman who is the head of women's advancement of women's rights is an anti-feminist. the minister who's the head of internal security in the police has no defense experience whatsoever and was rejected by the army because he was basically a juvenile delinquent and had 8, criminal records against him. So one of the things is they haven't a clue what to do. It's a huge government and very wasteful. Another thing is that I think they haven't completely internalized the size of this event. I mean, this is a historical event. As I said, nothing like this massacre has ever taken place in Israeli history. And they're still living in their little bubbles. A third thing is that I think they're busy trying to take advantage of the situation, which is a really ugly and horrible thing, but it's very true. For example, there are all kinds of land grabs now going on the West Bank. There's a lot of incitement going on by the Ministry of Internal Security in Jerusalem. There are people from the government who have been giving backing to all kinds of really racist and coming out with racist statements, trying to use the war and the massacre as a way to divide society even further. So it's a combination of all those things in different proportions. But I hope that it'll become clear that most of the community, most of Israeli society rejects that. I'll say that there was a poll taken, I think 2 days ago, and more than 70% of the population, including, I think it's more than 80%, more than, I'm wary of giving numbers, but an overwhelming majority of the Israeli public sees the government as responsible both for the disaster, which was a security disaster because they were busy with the territories and not with guarding the borders, and everything that's happened as the responsibility of the government and as Netanyahu in particular. And there's a majority even amongst Likud supporters, people who voted Likud in the last elections, who say that Netanyahu must resign. And the only real divide is whether he should resign now or immediately after the war.
Thank you. Yes. And kind of to continue off of that vein, talking about the government and then all of these civilians that are coming together for making change. I'd love to ask you how the protest movement and all of these mutual aid societies that are popping up, how can we see that as an act of patriotism rather than this act of divisiveness of they are doing this instead of the government and so forth?
Well, I think, first of all, some of the people from the movement and from my own party were the first to go down. Those who have arms or have proper training went down to actually help with the fighting on the 7th, on the Saturday, or to help save people who were trapped in the South. And so I think a lot of people have appreciated the fact that while the government was still not even responding, not even talking, there are a lot of people who are patriots who are going down to help. Second of all, I think the stepping in, it's not as if we're pushing the government out. We're just doing things that need to be done. And third of all, I think we're doing it in a very generous way. And I'll give an example. We have been flooded with donations from all over the city, and we have this huge storehouse. And in the beginning, everyone was donating to the families of who were evacuated and so forth, or giving help to reservists who were called up. But what we ended up seeing, and I myself saw this, is that there were people from the neighborhood, which is it's a poor neighborhood. Those of you know at Nachlaot, some of the people were just coming in and asking if they could take things. And at the beginning, there's some bewilderment, and we still haven't decided what we're going to do because we're not supposed to be a welfare center. But there are people from the neighborhood who are coming in and thanking us for providing them with all kinds of help, even though their family is not in reserve duty, whatever, but we've become a welfare center. Apart from which, I think a lot of people who would not have supported Meretz or the Labor or any of the support movement from Ashkelon, for example, are coming in to thank us. Yesterday, I'm about to put something up on Facebook about this, but a bunch of people, there's a member of Knesset who came to visit, And we're talking to him, and some people from Eshkelon, who, as again, were not typical Meretz voters, came up to say thank you and thank us and thank the people thing, and say, you know, we're taking care of them when the government is still not. So I don't think it's a divisive thing. I think people genuinely want to help, genuinely want to show solidarity, and generally are pained by the fact that there are people being left without any help.
Yeah.
And we have to also remember that in the period prior to the war, when we were in the height of the protest movement, the members of the coalition accused the protesters of literally treasoning, treason, and that immediately was reversed into an act of patriot. Of course, the protest movement denied that outright by saying what we're doing is an act of saving Israel's future as a democracy. But that didn't play out so well in the Israeli discourse. Right now, when these same protesters have become the backbone of civil society, it's very hard to accuse them of treason, let alone they're being commended for and appreciated for what they're doing. So that, I think, in itself has huge consequences. We're not doing any predictions for Israel's political future in this call, but I think it's something that we will definitely see the fruits of in the future.
A number of you have asked, and maybe Laura can comment, and then we really do have this about ceasefires, what the percentage of support for this military operation. I know you're facing those questions day in and day out. I think at the moment, and Laura, again, your reflection, overwhelmingly the Israeli public understands that the serious ground and air operation is to dismantle Hamas. No one is rejoicing. Maybe some are rejoicing of the human and cost, the innocent cost. No one. We understand there's a terrible cost to this. But we also are faced with the humanitarian crisis of the hostages, and not that these are moral equivalents, but no one, at least in this conversation on the Israeli side, is we would be happy to have a serious ceasefire if there was a serious attempt to get the innocents out of the way, hostages, innocent Gazans on the other side. But at the moment, the military reality is such that in order to dismantle, and it's going to be we already see, we lost 16 soldiers just yesterday, from the first serious ground operation. So I understand you're facing this crisis, but I think it's important for all of us to remember we're yet definitely in the heat of a terrible, terrible military operation now. And what's the game plan? I can't answer. Maybe, yeah. And I think the game plan, the dream plan, is a different kind of Gaza, and a hope for a Palestinian people living side by side with us, but we're not there yet. But I think it's the hope of certainly someone like Laura in politics and people like us. So Laura, you want to say something, and then Elan and I can sum up.
Does Marina have another?
Unless.
Okay.
I'm actually going to get to thank you guys. So.
Oh, you don't have to. Laura, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say something about what the Israeli public wants. First of all, the Israeli public wants the hostages back. I mean, that is really, it's unbelievable that they will have been held. It's almost a month. And this includes infants, 3-year-old twins. It is absolutely horrendous, and people are outraged that there isn't more international involvement about that, because it is just unbelievable and they're being left there. So that is one thing that there's a lot of very strong feeling about, and I feel it too. They haven't even released names or reports on who they have. So people are living, people whose family members were abducted are living with this terrible uncertainty. They don't know if they're dead or alive or what their conditions are. So that's one thing. About the ceasefire or not, there's a very mixed opinion. I even say my own feelings are mixed, but I would say that if one remembers the response in the US to 9/11 and, the war in Afghanistan, tens of thousands of people killed. I think that the 9/11 comparison is what we should be thinking about, because Israel has been in and out of Gaza each time with a temporary ceasefire. I think it was 7 times I counted in the last 10 to 12 years. And people don't want another ceasefire where they're left in power. I would say also it's important to note the attitudes of people living in Gaza. There was 2 polls, one in July and one, I think, at the beginning in September, that were published at the Washington Institute, where most people in Gaza did not want a continuation of the Hamas rule because they are brutal. The best example I could think of is Khmer Rouge. It is a brutal reign there. So I'm not, I think it is terrible there's a terrible humanitarian disaster going on now. I have friends who have friends in Gaza. I am against the loss of any human life, certainly civilian human life, but I really don't see how Israel can leave the Hamas in this brutal regime in place. And I have Palestinian friends. There's one Palestinian woman who I think spoke very eloquently, and she said, this is not the way to free Palestine. And I actually wrote something along the line following what she said. This is a gang of rapists and murderers. They are not the people I want to have ruling there. And the question I think that Israel and the world has to face is, how can we put together a group of responsible nations and bodies who will offer an alternative? If it's the Palestinian Authority, they're not my best friend or first choice either, but they're at least a more responsible body that is recognized internationally. And I think if they were willing to come in, if the Egyptians were willing to take responsibility, although I know they don't want to, I think they should come in. But I think there are very few Israelis who are in favor of, immediate cease of hostilities, because we know from experience that if we pull out now, they'll be back. And not only will they be back, but they're still in strength now. I was talking actually with a Palestinian about this on my way here now. The Hamas authorities, the regime there has been taking apparently a huge percentage of the international support and spending it on these tunnels. And what's happening now is they're leaving all the civilians on ground, and they are being killed in masses, and it's painful, while they are hiding underground. Or the real Hamas leaders are abroad. And I don't think that we can allow that to go on. So if the question is a ceasefire a solution? I don't think it's a solution right now, except for humanitarian purposes with very limited time specifications. And I'm sure that most of the Israeli public doesn't want it, however painful it is, because we don't want to go back to where we were. And I'll just say a last thing. In the average year, over the last 10, I think, or in many of the last 10 years, there have been more than 1,000 missiles aimed at Israel that have hit Israel. We haven't suffered from them because we have civilian support. But the idea is, and the reason I mentioned that is, this is an untenable situation. If you can imagine what the US would do if Mexico were regularly firing rockets at them, that's why we have a government, that's why we have an army, is to stop that kind of thing. So I feel for the Palestinian people. I hope there will be a regime change quickly. I hope we can pull our soldiers out quickly. But I don't see that an immediate ceasefire would be the right thing.
So
I want to thank you. We're out of time, unfortunately.
Okay.
Let me just say a few things. We'll hold all the questions in the chat so that Naamah and Elan can get to them hopefully next week. Laura, thank you so much, not just for being with us this morning, but for all the work you're doing. Naamah and Elan, thank you for always and for curating this, what will be, I know, an amazing, already begun to be an amazing series that should give us some real sense of what's going on. And I hope that you heard from all three of our panelists how important our engagement and connection is. Rabbi Buchdahl talked about this and has continued to talk about this in services, and any way that we can connect is really critical. There are a host of programs, too many to mention. Please, I think there's an email going out to the congregation today, and it's on our Israel webpage. We'll be with Nami and Elan again next week. Michael Koplow every Thursday, except today, around the political stuff. Shlomo Brody, Ilana Stein-Hain, and Yossi Klein Halevi will be going deeper into also what's going on. And finally, at the end of November, a panel moderated by Abby Pogrebin with Yair Rosenberg and Rachel Fish on anti-Semitism. And I've left out things, including opportunities for us to just process how we're feeling. Please go to the website and see what's going on. And thank you.
I so we left you a little more hopeful. Our people are amazing. And we will get through this together, and we will get through this because, as I said, our Jewish DNA that chooses life and pursues peace.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Sarah Berman, Rabbi Sarah Berman, and Marina Nebro for helping to organize all of this. And we'll see you next week, if not before.
Thank you very much to all of you.